The macabre history of the Coldwells. They forced 10 kids to live in a storm drain. Storm that battered the town of Millbrook, Oregon, on November 12, 2024, was the worst the region had seen in over 50 years. Hurricane-force winds and torrential rain overwhelmed the aging storm drainage system, sending contaminated water surging through the streets and flooding basements throughout the community. But it was what the floodwaters brought to the surface that would expose one of the most horrifying cases of child abuse ever documented in the Pacific Northwest. Emergency. Responder Captain Jake Morrison was leading a search and rescue team through the flooded downtown area when he heard what sounded like children's voices echoing from beneath a partially collapsed storm drain grate. Initially assuming that children had been caught in the flooding, Morrison and his team worked frantically to clear the debris and access what they believed would be storm victims in need of immediate rescue. What they discovered instead defied comprehension. In the maze of interconnected storm drains beneath Millbrook streets, 10 children and teenagers had been living in conditions that challenged the very definition of human survival. The oldest appeared to be in her late teens, while the youngest couldn't have been more than 7 years old. All were severely malnourished, covered in grime and sores, and exhibiting signs of long-term trauma that suggested they had been living underground for years. The children's initial reaction to their rescuers was not relief, but terror. They cowered from the flashlights, covered their eyes from the weak daylight filtering through the drain opening, and begged the rescue workers not to take them to the cursed surface. Their speech was strange and limited, mixed with words that seemed to be from a different language or dialect that none of the responders could identify. Investigation into the storm drain system revealed that the children had been living in a network of modified drainage tunnels that extended for nearly 2 miles beneath the town. The tunnels had been crudely but systematically altered to accommodate human habitation, with sleeping areas carved out of concrete walls, improvised waste disposal systems, and food storage areas that showed evidence of long-term use. The modifications to the drainage system suggested sophisticated planning and engineering knowledge. Someone had installed crude ventilation systems, electrical connections tapped from city infrastructure, and even primitive heating elements to make the tunnels barely habitable during Oregon's cold winters. The work appeared to have been ongoing for years, with evidence of multiple construction phases and improvements. The children themselves told a story that initially seemed impossible to believe. They described being brought to the tunnels by people they called the providers, who had told them that the surface world had been contaminated by poison and disease. They had been taught that living underground was the only way to survive, that exposure to sunlight would kill them, and that the tunnel system was their only sanctuary from a hostile world above. According to their fragmented accounts, the children had been organized into a strict hierarchy, with older children responsible for caring for younger ones and maintaining the tunnel system. They described daily routines centered around scavenging for food, maintaining their underground habitat, and avoiding the poison waters that occasionally flooded their living spaces during heavy rains. The investigation took a dramatic turn when authorities traced the electrical connections in the tunnels back to their source. The power was being illegally tapped from the electrical grid at a property owned by Dale and Maureen Coldwell, a reclusive couple who lived in a modest house on the outskirts of town. The Coldwells had been Millbrook residents for over 20 years, known to their neighbors as quiet, eccentric individuals who kept to themselves and rarely socialized with others in the community. When police arrived at the Coldwell property to investigate the illegal electrical connection, they discovered a house that appeared normal from the outside, but contained disturbing evidence of the couple's true activities. The basement had been converted into a monitoring station with surveillance equipment that allowed them to observe the children in the tunnels. Maps of the storm drain system covered the walls, marked with notations about food delivery points, waste disposal areas, and what appeared to be punishment locations. The Coldwells themselves were found in their living room, apparently having died by suicide as the floodwaters began to rise and their crimes were about to be exposed. Beside their bodies was a manifesto explaining their actions, written in the same strange dialect that the children had been using. The document revealed a twisted belief system that portrayed the surface world as corrupted and the storm drains as a pure sanctuary where children could be raised free from modern society's contamination. Investigation into the Coldwells' background revealed a gradual descent into extremist ideology and paranoid delusion. Dale Coldwell had been a city utilities worker with extensive knowledge of Millbrook's infrastructure, while Maureen had worked as a substitute teacher with access to vulnerable children. Over the years, they had become increasingly isolated and paranoid, eventually developing their own apocalyptic belief system that justified their crimes as acts of salvation rather than abuse. The children's origins proved to be a complex mix of abduction, family abandonment, and exploitation of systemic failures. Some had been taken from families experiencing crisis situations. Others had been runaways who were lured with promises of shelter and food, and several appeared to have been acquired through illegal adoption networks. The Coldwells had specifically targeted children who were unlikely to be missed or whose disappearances could be easily explained. Medical examination of the rescued children revealed the devastating physical toll of their underground existence. All suffered from severe malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies, and respiratory problems caused by poor air quality in the tunnels. Several had untreated injuries and infections that had been festering for months or years. The youngest children showed signs of developmental delays consistent with spending their formative years in an environment devoid of proper nutrition, education, and human interaction. The psychological evaluation of the children was even more disturbing. Years of isolation and indoctrination had left them with profound trauma and distorted perceptions of reality. They had been taught to fear sunlight, fresh air, and interaction with people from the surface world. Many initially refused to eat food that hadn't been delivered through their established tunnel system, believing that surface food was poisoned. The tunnel system itself contained evidence of the systematic dehumanization that the children had endured. They had been assigned numbers rather than allowed to use their real names. Their personal belongings had been restricted to a few basic items, and they had been subjected to primitive punishments for any behavior that the Coldwells deemed inappropriate. The walls of the tunnels were covered with scratched messages documenting years of suffering, desperation, and gradually fading hope for rescue. As investigators worked to map the full extent of the tunnel network, they discovered evidence that the Coldwell operation had been active for over a decade. Different areas of the tunnels showed varying ages of modification and use, suggesting that the couple had been gradually expanding their underground prison as they acquired more children. Some sections contained the remains of children who had died in captivity, their bodies simply left to decompose in unused portions of the drainage system. The revelation that 10 children had been living beneath Millbrook streets for years without detection shocked the community and raised serious questions about how such an extensive operation could have gone unnoticed. Residents reported remembering strange sounds from storm drains, occasional glimpses of pale figures near drainage grates, and unusual activity around the Coldwell property, but none had connected these observations to the possibility of hidden children. As Chapter 1 concluded, the 10 rescued children were beginning the long process of medical treatment and psychological rehabilitation. Their survival was nothing short of miraculous, but their recovery would require years of intensive care and support. The storm that had exposed their suffering had also given them their first taste of freedom in years, but emerging from the darkness would prove to be almost as challenging as surviving within it. The rehabilitation of the 10 children rescued from Millbrook's storm drain system proved to be one of the most complex and challenging cases ever faced by child trauma specialists. Dr. Rebecca Chen, brought in from Portland's Specialized Child Crisis Center described the victims as existing in a state of psychological limbo between human civilization and primitive survival that had no precedent in modern psychology. The children's initial resistance to treatment stemmed from years of systematic indoctrination that had convinced them that the surface world was inherently dangerous. Simple medical procedures like blood draws and X-rays caused extreme panic, as the children had been taught that any interaction with surface technology would result in contamination and death. Even basic activities like bathing with soap or eating fresh fruits caused anxiety attacks, as these represented forbidden luxuries from the poisoned world above. The oldest survivor, a girl who eventually chose the name Sarah, became the key to understanding the full scope of the Coldwell operation. Through months of careful interviews, she revealed the complex social structure that had developed among the tunnel children. The Coldwells had established a rigid hierarchy where older children were responsible for maintaining order and discipline among the younger ones, creating a system where victims became complicit in their own oppression. Sarah's account revealed that the Coldwells had made periodic visits to the tunnel system, usually at night, to deliver food, supplies, and what they called guidance sessions. These sessions involved lengthy lectures about the corruption of the surface world and the children's special role as the pure remnant of humanity. The children had been taught that their suffering was temporary and necessary, that they were being prepared for an eventual emergence when the surface world had been cleansed. The psychological manipulation employed by the Coldwells was particularly sophisticated for individuals with no formal training in psychology or social control. They had created an elaborate mythology around the children's captivity, complete with rituals, ceremonies, and reward systems that reinforced their authority and the children's dependence. The children had been taught to view their captors as protectors and saviors rather than abusers. Investigation into the tunnel modifications revealed the true extent of the Coldwells' preparation and planning. The couple had spent years studying Millbrook's infrastructure, identifying weak points in the storm drain system that could be exploited, and gradually expanding their underground complex. They had even planned for population growth with unfinished sections of tunnel that appeared to be designed for additional children. The discovery of the Coldwells planning documents revealed that they had intended their tunnel operation to serve as a model for similar facilities in other cities. They had been in correspondence with like-minded individuals across the country, sharing their methods and encouraging the establishment of underground sanctuaries for children. The investigation expanded to examine potential connections to missing children cases in other states where similar infrastructure modifications might have occurred. The children's adaptation to surface life followed patterns that revealed the depth of their psychological conditioning. Those who had been captured at younger ages adapted more quickly to new routines and environments, while children who had retained more memories of life before their captivity struggled with conflicting loyalties and confused perceptions of reality. Several continued to express guilt about abandoning their duty to protect the younger children in the tunnels. Medical treatment of the survivors required innovative approaches to address health problems that were virtually unknown in modern pediatric medicine. Years of vitamin D deficiency had caused severe bone development issues, while poor nutrition had stunted physical and cognitive development. The constant exposure to contaminated water and air in the tunnel system had caused respiratory and skin conditions that took months of treatment to resolve. The psychological therapy process was complicated by the children's limited vocabulary and distorted understanding of normal social relationships. They had developed their own language and communication system within the tunnels, mixing English with invented words and phrases that reflected their isolated experience. Learning to communicate with the outside world required not just language, therapy, but fundamental re-education about human, social interaction. The investigation into the children's origins revealed the calculated nature of the Coldwells' victim selection. They had specifically targeted children from unstable family situations, runaways who had already disappeared from official oversight, and children involved with overwhelmed social service systems where their absence might not be immediately noticed. The couple had used their positions in the community to identify vulnerable children and create opportunities for abduction. Several of the rescued children were eventually reunited with family members who had been searching for them for years. These reunions were bittersweet, as the children had been so fundamentally changed by their experience that they struggled to reconnect with their previous lives and identities. Many had difficulty trusting the adults who claimed to be their parents or siblings, having been taught that all surface relationships were corrupted and dangerous. The legal aftermath of the Coldwell case was complicated by the perpetrators' deaths, which prevented traditional prosecution and closure for the victims and community. However, the investigation led to charges against several individuals who had assisted the Coldwells operation, including utilities workers who had helped with illegal electrical connections and social workers who had failed to properly investigate reports of missing children. The case prompted significant reforms in how cities monitor their infrastructure for unauthorized modifications and how child protective services track missing children from vulnerable populations. New protocols were established for investigating reports of strange sounds or activities around utility systems, and interagency cooperation was improved to prevent children from falling through systemic cracks. The tunnel system beneath Millbrook was permanently sealed after investigators completed their work, but not before extensive documentation was created for use in training law enforcement and social workers to recognize signs of similar operations. The city installed new monitoring systems to detect unauthorized access to utility infrastructure and established regular inspection protocols for all underground facilities. 3 of the rescued children were never successfully reunited with families, either because their origins could not be determined or because their biological families were unable to provide appropriate care for children with such severe trauma. These children were placed with specialized foster families trained in dealing with extreme cases of abuse and neglect. The community response to the Coldwell revelations was a mixture of horror, guilt, and determination to prevent similar tragedies. Many residents expressed regret about not investigating the strange signs they had noticed around the storm drain system, leading to increased vigilance and reporting of suspicious activities. The case became a powerful reminder of the importance of community awareness and intervention in protecting vulnerable children. Sarah, the oldest survivor, eventually became a powerful advocate for missing children and survivors of long-term captivity. Her transformation from a terrified tunnel dweller to an articulate spokesperson demonstrated the remarkable resilience of children who survive extreme trauma. She worked with law enforcement agencies to develop new approaches for investigating disappearances and identifying hidden victims. The memorial created for the children who died in the tunnel system features a garden planted above the sealed drainage entrance with native Oregon plants chosen for their ability to thrive in challenging conditions. The memorial serves as a reminder that even in the darkest and most hostile environments, life finds a way to persist and eventually reach toward the light. The Coldwell case remains one of the most extensively studied examples of infrastructure-based child abuse, providing crucial insights for urban planners, law enforcement, and child protection services. The 10 survivors' journey from underground captivity to surface integration continues to inspire professionals working with trafficked and abused children, proving that even the most systematic attempts to destroy childhood innocence cannot ultimately extinguish the human capacity for healing and growth. The storm that exposed the Coldwells crimes was eventually recognized as a blessing disguised as a natural disaster, a moment when the earth itself seemed determined to wash away the secrets hidden beneath its surface and bring the truth into the light. The children who emerged from that darkness carry with them not just the scars of their ordeal, but also the hope that their survival can help protect other children from similar fates. Thank you for watching another tale unfold here on NW Storytime. Every story hides a secret, and tonight you uncovered another one. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us keep the secrets alive. Until next time, stay curious,